Here we go. Good evening. I'm Mark Levy. I'm your host for the first 2024 Renewable Energy Series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the GLREA, our planning the work and working the plan for 2024. Our host tonight will be GLREA's Executive Director, John Freeman, and John Richter, our esteemed Senior Policy Advisor. Our financial sponsors for the Renewable Energy Seminar Series are the Michigan Department of Environment and Great Lakes, Eagle, McNaught McKay, and Harvest Solar. Our Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, as most of you know, was formed in 1991. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization supported by members to educate and advocate for renewable energy in Michigan. You can join GLREA or get information about our membership at www.glrea.org. We encourage you to do so, and also to encourage everyone you know and your entire DNA pool to do that as well. Our GLREA Zooms are each 4 times a month. First Thursday is the Ann Arbor Solar Stories, which are case studies on solar installations in Ann Arbor. Second Tuesday is my seminar, the Renewable Energy Seminar. Third Thursday is the Detroit Solar Stories, similar to Ann Arbor, where they focus on case studies from Detroit. And the fourth Thursday of each month then is My Solar Stories, which are statewide case studies, as well as energy questions and answers. And that's hosted by John Sarver, the founder of the GLREA series and our former GLREA secretary and executive director, actually. So our seminar tonight, as with our other seminars, cover topics of interest to renewable energy users, businesses, advocates, stakeholders. Seminars include content ranging from technology to business to public policy. The Renewable Energy Seminar is a Zoom event held at the second and Thursday of each month, again, from 7 to 8 p.m. Related questions or comments or suggestions should be directed to me, Mark Levy, your host, and there's my email, mclevy123@gmail.com. We ask that you please remember to mute yourself. Listening to your dog talk over our speaker doesn't help things well, so please remember to do that. Also, please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. You can raise your hand under the reactions button, press that to ask a question, and I will call on you. So I want to welcome John Freeman and John Richter to the kickoff of the GLREA 2024 Renewable Energy Seminar Series. Tonight, our speakers will talk about GLREA's strategic public policy agenda and priorities for 2024. John Richter is former president of GLREA, currently serves as a member of GLREA's board of directors and as GLREA's senior policy advisor. In this position, John helps direct our utility rate case interventions, or actually directs their utility rate care intervention. And he is also a major force in establishing GLREA's public policy priorities. John Freeman is a former legislator, and he serves as GLREA's executive director. In this position, John is responsible for the management and administration of GLREA's operations and strategic priorities. I welcome you, gentlemen, and John Richter is going to kick this session off, so I'm going to stop sharing right now. And John, it's up to you, and you can take over. And I'm going to mute myself. Again, please remember to mute yourselves if you haven't already.
There we go. Can you see my slide? All right. So I'm going to just start with a recap of our interventions and what we've done with the Michigan Public Service Commission and electric utilities in the last 2 years. Very short summary here. So in 2022, we managed to get a small increase in the outflow credit for solar customers, and we also managed to build a very strong renewable energy build program from Consumers Energy. The utilities have to file integrated resource plans where they plan out what power plants are going to meet demand across the next 20 years. And so we use those cases to work for more utility scale generation while also working for rooftop solar in smaller installations. In 2023, Big issue was the cap on distributed generation tariff participation. So as most of you know, there was a cap on how many people that utilities had to allow into the distributed generation program. We use these cases to negotiate that with the utilities. Got a much stronger renewable energy build program from DTE and negotiated earlier closure of some of DTE's, well, all of DTE's coal-fired power plants. So the big news, the big driver of things happening in the MPSC this year is going to be this whole suite of new energy bills that just passed. And I'm sure John Freeman is going to talk some about that and where we're going to go from here. And there were a number of very beneficial aspects to that. The cap on the number of DG systems is dramatically increased. I have a slide on each of these where I'll go into more detail. Renewable energy systems up to 550 kilowatts can now get DG rates. That's up from 150 kilowatts. So this will be great news for our installers, for commercial, companies that are putting solar on their roof. The renewable portfolio standard, this is the law that requires utilities to get a certain percentage of their electricity from green sources, was dramatically increased. So it's been at 15% for a while. It's going to go to 50% in 2030. Now, that's only 6 years from now. That's a dramatic increase in that 6-year period. 60% by 2035. And then 100% clean energy, which is a broader category than renewable energy, by 2040. Now, to meet these new goals, the utilities are going to have to refile their renewable energy plans showing how they're going to meet this new standard. There was an increase in the standard for energy waste reduction plans. These are programs that the utilities run out of taxpayer fund or ratepayer funding to encourage people to reduce their energy use. And you'll see this in like bill inserts from the utility, or they'll have rebates at like Costco on compact fluorescents, LED bulbs. They'll pay for you to get your furnace tuned up or different things like that, right? So that they're supposed to reduce their energy, our energy use by somewhat that got increased. In integrated resource plans, the commission has always been a little hamstrung because it really just looks at reliability and how we meet demand at the lowest possible cost. And in this law, the legislature broadened the scope of things that the Public Service Commission can consider to include climate change, equity, reliability, affordability, and cumulative health effects. So that's a lot of new things they can consider in different ways. They can weigh what the utilities are planning and maybe direct them to change things. We also got a big change in siting. So when the utilities want to build a large solar or wind farm, historically they go through a siting and approval in the local township or other local government. And for the large systems now, that the kind of final say on that has been moved to the Public Service Commission. The local entities cannot create rules more restrictive than those laid out. And I don't fully understand that part, all right? But it's certainly something the utilities wanted in the legislation because it's going to make it easier for them to site these large-scale systems. And then there was also a directive that the utilities must install 2,500 megawatts of energy storage, which generally means batteries, which a lot of states have had storage requirements. This is new to Michigan, however, so it was also quite a change. So this whole collection of bills was just a dramatic change in Michigan energy policy. The last time we had a big change like this was 2016. Time before that was 2008. It doesn't happen real often. And it takes quite a while for all of these legal changes to sort of percolate through the regulatory process and become, real action on the ground by the electric utilities. So the cap on the distributed generation program and the system sizes. So prior to the new law, The cap was set at 1% of the utility's maximum summer peak load. When we had negotiated that DTE would increase that to 6% and consumers' energy to 4%. But now with the new law, that's all moot. The cap is now 10% of peak summer load. And it's actually a bigger increase than that sounds like, because the old cap was divided into 3 different categories, kind of small residential systems, commercial systems, and then a quarter of the cap was set aside for anaerobic digester systems, of which there aren't any, or maybe there's one. So this did away with that category. There's just 2 categories. Not less than 20% of the capacity under the cap is reserved for less than 20 kilowatt systems, which are predominantly residential, and not more than 50% for 20 kilowatts to 550 kilowatts. Now, previously, the limit on distributed generation systems was 150 kilowatts. So that's a big increase. And, stores or factories or businesses can put a much larger system on now and still get into the distributed generation program. Like I said, they removed the old category reserved for anaerobic digesters. Now, previously, your system was also limited to no more than 100% of the customer's prior 12 months of electric consumption, right? The idea here is that you're building a solar system under distributed generation for your own production of your own use, not so you can become a utility unto yourself, right? They increased that a little bit to 110%. Particularly because people now are buying electric vehicles or they're putting in a heat pump. Suddenly their electric usage goes up, right? So this gives you a little room in that. Now, what's interesting is the old law specifically said to be in the DG program, you can't be bigger than 150 kilowatts. This law doesn't exactly say that. It says here's a category below 20 and here's another category up to 550. But it doesn't really say there's a limit. So in a current electric rate case that's going on, a couple of groups have argued that the law doesn't specify a maximum system size other than the 110% of usage. So there is no limit. If you're a factory and you have a huge roof, if you want to put a 5 megawatt system on your factory, hey, go for it. So we'll see if that gets really decided in that case, but the commission has raised this as an issue. The commission issued a press release today, and they opened like 7 new dockets all about these new energy laws. So they just sent that out today, and I rewrote this whole presentation based on that because there was a lot more information there about what the commission is thinking. So they created this new case, U21569, issued an initial order, and they're asking for comments by March 26th. And within that order, it asks a number of specific questions, a few of which I've copied here. Is there a purpose or a need for a generation meter? The law talks about that and says the utility can't make you pay for one, but they can put one in. And this is a utility meter that measures the total amount of power your solar system is generating. Well, I don't know. If somebody else had another opinion, I'd be interested, but I don't see the purpose for it. I think the utilities were interested in measuring your total generation because they kept pushing for a sell all, buy all program where you would have to sell all of your production to the utility at some low rate, and then you would buy all of your usage from them at the full retail rate. It's very clear in law now that's not how things are going to be. So I don't see any purpose for a generation meter. Most solar systems are already monitoring all that. You can see all that on a web page, minute by minute, hour by hour. I don't know that there's any point in the utility having a meter measuring your system's output. Does the new provision allow for customers to offset the entire bill, including separate time of use periods, surcharges, and other items that were not historically offset? This is huge. So under the old law, or at least the MPSC interpretations of it, your credits for DG could not offset the distribution charges on your bill. So if you produced a lot of power during peak periods and got big credits from that, you would end up finding that you had a credit writing on your bill, but you would still be getting billed. That's because they wouldn't apply the credit to the distribution part of your bill. And the commission's now going, we could be the way the law is written now that that's all just silly and the credit could apply to your whole bill. So you better believe we're going to answer loud and strong, heck yes. There's also been this goofy implementation by the utilities where they say your credits are chopped up by time of use periods. So if you made money during peak, made credits during peak period, you can't apply them to your off peak. I don't know where they ever got that. The law never said anything like that. But that's how it's been implemented by DTE, at least. And so this will be a great opportunity to get rid of that mess. And then they asked the question that's being asked in this current rate case. Taken together, did the revisions limit the size of a generator eligible to participate in DG to no larger than 550 kilowatts? So the commission is asking for input on that question. Yeah, that's all I can say about that. What's going on in that case. So this has been a point of some discussion within the GLREA is, well, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? On the one hand, we want more solar and this would encourage larger rooftop systems, but there's a serious downside, which is we've got this 10% cap. Imagine a few very large systems suddenly eating that all up, right? Then we could run out of it and squeeze out. Well, we couldn't squeeze out residential because half of the whole cap is reserved for them, right? Um, but it could use up the larger category of the cap rather quickly. So maybe that's not a good thing. And as we go through this, I'd be interested in hearing people's thoughts on that. The RPS and clean energy. So this was the huge change. DT and consumers already have voluntary clean energy plans. A lot of this is because their large corporate and industrial customers are pushing them for more clean energy. But now they're going to have to do it. It's law. The law also had a change that I'm sure the utilities asked for that allowed them to generate a substantial profit by signing long-term power purchase agreements with third parties. So some other developer builds a giant solar field, they sell all the power to one of the utilities, they sell the renewable energy certificates with them. Under the old rules, the utility got back in rates what they paid for that power, but they didn't get any profit on it. So they really didn't like doing that. But under the new law, they'll be able to generate a profit about similar in size, maybe bigger than they would if they built the plant themselves. So it's going to be interesting to see if that actually changes the utility stance on owning new generation facilities versus signing power purchase agreements. Now, clean energy is required by the law 100% by 2040. And so in addition to solar, this includes nuclear energy. It also allows for natural gas generation if 90% of the CO2 is captured and permanently sequestered, right? Which basically means pumped underground deep somewhere. Reportedly, the Department of Energy is planning on approving a $1.5 billion loan to restart the Palisades nuclear plant. So this is a nuclear plant in Western Michigan that had been shut down, had been scheduled for total decommissioning, and now there's plans to bring it back online. And I'm sure this clean energy standard is part of that. The owner of that plant has also announced plans to add two smaller nuclear reactor units at that site. Now, whether that happens is a whole other discussion, but at least you see a renaissance of interest in nuclear here happening out of this. The utilities are going to have to file new renewable energy plans about how they're going to meet these standards. We're going to need to be in those cases. DTE by July 19th, Consumers Energy, the other utilities. And now I think for the first time, the co-ops, munis, and alternative energy suppliers are going to have to file renewable energy plans. Comments are requested by March 8th, and the request specifically asks about the value of energy-related assets of renewable energy systems. They're saying, look, as we have more and more wind and solar, kind of the relative value of assets, things like dispatchability, right? Ability to turn a power plant on and off, become more valuable. What do you think this does in terms of how we value things? This is going to be dangerous, right? Because the utilities are going to come in and say, oh, yeah, we must have gas plants that we can turn on off at will. And these solar and wind things are nice if you don't have too much of them, but you put in too much and then you just lose control of the system. We'll have rolling blackouts and demons will come up out of the earth and, it'll just be terrible. So that's probably going to be another fight. I expect proposals for new nuclear plants. DTE historically, it's repeatedly tried to get a Fermi 3 plant. There's the whole buzz about small and modular reactors now. So they're gonna, jump on that. I've looked at the plans and the steps that have to take to license those. I really think it's very hard to imagine how a new nuclear power plant is going to get licensed and built before 2040. Uh, I don't think they can do that, but they might pretend they're going to. I also expect proposals for carbon capture from the gas plants. DTE talked about this in one of their filings. They've identified a geological formation in northern Illinois and Indiana that the DOE's done tests on it and showed that it can sequester carbon. But then you got to put in this pipeline to move the CO2 down there. And pipeline proposals that have gone on in Kansas and Iowa and North and South Dakota have met fierce local opposition, like Line 5 kind of local opposition. And I think that's going to be a big problem for the idea of carbon capture. Staff has to do a new study on energy waste reduction, demand response, and electrification of transportation, buildings, and industry. They'll probably hire some outside consultants for that. And then integrated resource plans. The utilities are going to have to file new IRPs, and the commission's going to look at how this affects climate change, health, and environmental injustice communities. So the staff's supposed to draw up a straw man document on IRP parameters. So these are all the things that the utilities are required to include in their plans when they submit them. And then, like I said, siting rules have been changed. The MPSC has big say on this now, and the MPSC staff are going to initiate meetings with interested persons, and there's going to be some kind of filing and comments on that. Energy storage. So the utilities must provide a storage plan. That doesn't mean they've bought anything yet by 2029, the year end. It's not a misprint. It's not a typo. It's 2029. I don't know why they need that long for that. They get a financial incentive for doing storage, and the commission's going to do a study on long-term storage, and then staff's going to work with people and help the utilities to include that in their next IRPs. The staff's going to figure out how they split the 2,500 megawatt requirement amongst all the different utilities. We do have a little DG news that's still in progress, unfortunately. I hope we'd have the ruling by the time of this meeting, but it didn't happen. So the outflow from our solar systems into the utility is green energy, but the outflow credit is based on the utility's cost of dirty energy, right? The utilities sell green energy at a premium, but they're not giving us the premium on the green power we're selling them. So in a case, we asked the MPSC to make DTE pay customers for a green premium for their outflow. MPS staff supported this. Now, mind you, the green premium at DTE right now is 0, but it's likely to change in the future. The case is still in progress. We're probably going to get a decision March 1st. I think the new RPS that requires the utilities to get a lot more green energy works in our favor because this is green energy that's not being sold as green energy. So I think it would really help with that. If we don't get a good ruling in that case, we can take it up in this new docket that they've created asking about the value of green energy in this new, environment, well, guess what? We have a point about that. So I've talked a lot, and I want to throw
So
this
John,
open.
let's hold your questions, John. There was a lot of activity in the chat, so let's let John Freeman go. Why don't you go through the chat and go through the questions, and then come back in and
Great
pick up.
plan, Mark.
And okay, so John Freeman, you ready? He must be ready. There you go. John Freeman.
Yeah,
There
I
you go.
did.
Oh, okay.
Let's take down this. Let's take John's.
John, John Richter, you have to take your stop sharing.
Oh, stop share. Sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
So anyway, I just want to welcome everybody, and I want to thank John for his presentation. I think by listening to John, you get a really good sense of some of the amazing work we did in 2023. We were part of a large coalition to enact these bills. And so I'm very proud of that work because, as John pointed out, this is the most significant changes in energy policy since 2016. And the fact that we're forcing the utilities to generate a lot more electricity from renewable energy sources is fabulous. I want to make one tangential comment, and I'm actually going to send John Sarver an email. Last May or June, when I went up to Lansing to hear the CEO of Consumers Energy testify to the House Energy Committee, one of the members of the House of Representatives asked him about nuclear power and whether Consumers was interested in nuclear power. And this CEO said point blank, we don't see nuclear power as having any role within Consumers Energy's future because the cost is too much. There's other sources of energy that are less costly and less dangerous. And then, of course, the time, as John pointed out, it takes to license a new nuclear plant. And so I think that this whole notion of reopening Palisades, I think, frankly, it's misguided policy. Because one of the ironies about the fight that we have been in for years is the fact that Detroit Edison and Consumers Energy always talk about how the fact that solar owners are being subsidized by non-solar owners. You hear that all the time. And they use that as the basis to do all sorts of negative things against solar. So the people that own Palisades, they want to get a $300 million subsidy from the state of Michigan in order to try and make the economics of reopening Palisades pencil out. So I find it very interesting that there is a kind of an inconsistency in terms of how some people view solar versus nuclear power. And when you compare, let's say, the levelized cost of solar energy or even wind energy versus nuclear, it's night and day, hands down. It's much better for solar and wind. Now, the only slight counter argument to that, of course, is that nuclear power doesn't generate carbon dioxide, but it does generate a whole lot of low, radioactive waste, which we have no location in this country to store it. And right now it's being stored locally wherever these nukes are currently located. So in the case of, of Fermi, they're storing high level, radioactive waste at that site right off of Lake Erie. So in terms of potential ecological and environmental catastrophes that could potentially happen, just think about what happened in Japan when they had that earthquake and the tsunami, and it ruptured the nuclear power plants over there. And now the Japanese government is starting to leak radioactive water into the ocean. The ocean's one thing, which I don't necessarily agree with that either. But when you're talking about Lake Erie, and the dangers that poses, I think we really need to think twice about that as a strategy. Okay, I'm going to talk just really quickly because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions about essentially our work plan for 2024. And I break down the work plan to two categories. The first one is program work. Then the second one is building the organization. And really quickly, in terms of program work, I basically see four buckets. And you've heard the first bucket, the Michigan Public Service Commission bucket that John Richter very nicely laid out for us in terms of this year. That's incredibly important work, and we're going to be there to represent solar owners and the solar industry, and to make sure these new laws get implemented in such a way that it reinforces the support for expansion of renewable energy in Michigan. But we're also going to continue on other legislative work, because we have an opportunity this year to continue to enact important legislation. And there are two basic bills that we were really looking at. The first one is community solar. Community solar, as you probably have all heard me write about in the weekly updates, was a part of Senate Bill 271. But unfortunately, during the negotiation process between Senator Sam Singh and DTE and consumers, that the utilities really don't like community solar. And so Sam had no choice but to take it out in order to get the rest of the package to be not opposed by the utilities. And the utilities have a lot of political power because they have a lot of money to give out in terms of campaign finances to both parties. And so that was just a reality of making that legislation. But it doesn't mean we're not going to continue trying for community solar, because both there are two bills in the House and there are two bills in the Senate, all promoting community solar. And both sets of these bills are bipartisan. So once the Democrats retain control, 2 more seats by April, the Democrats will once again be in control, 56 to 54 in the House, and they'll control the Senate. And of course, we have the current Democratic governor. We're going to try and see if we can push community solar over the finish line. The other bill, which some of you that got on this meeting early before we started, is that John Richter is moving into a new house in a development that's governed by a homeowners association. And his new homeowners association currently prohibits individuals putting solar on their roof at this new development. And that is a problem, not just in where John is building his new home, but all over the state. And so we don't think it's appropriate that an artificial entity should control whether a homeowner has the right to install solar. They currently have the right under Public Act 295, and have been reinforced with these bills that were enacted last October. So for a homeowners association to try and to restrict the expansion of solar, we think is inappropriate. And a number of other states have passed laws that prohibit homeowners associations from prohibiting solar. So we're going to try and work on that as well. A bill actually has passed the House and is sitting in the state Senate. And so again, we're going to be waiting until probably the latter part of April, and then hopefully we can move the bill in the Senate, and hopefully there'll be no changes. And so the journey will be a short one in order to get it to the governor to sign this law. So the second bucket is legislative work. The third bucket is education work. And this has been the bread and butter of this organization for years, is we educate people about the benefits of solar, how it saves money, how you contribute to fighting climate change. And so we're going to continue with the solar stories and the renewable energy seminars. We're going to be partnering with other organizations, putting on events, but we're also creating a guidebook, the Michigan Solar Communities Guidebook. We've been working on it for a while. We're going to get it done within the next month or so. And that's going to be a tool that we're going to work with local units of government on how they can support the expansion of solar within their local communities. We also have the Solarize program, which is a group buy program that combines a reduction in the cost for purchasing solar along with an educational component. And so that's going to be another tool that we'll be working on as well. We have a new board member. She's a young woman at University of Michigan. Her name is Katie Watson. I think she's on this call. She has got a marvelous idea that we want to work on together as an organization. she wants to create GLREA student ambassadors, where students from all the different universities throughout the state of Michigan will talk about solar on campuses and in their own homes and where they come from. And so we think this is another wonderful educational opportunity to educate young people about the benefits of solar and how you can contribute to fighting climate change, as well as opening up jobs for students that graduate. So I just wanted to give Katie a plug, because I think that's a very important program that we're going to be working on this year. The second major element of our plan this year is building the organization. And building the organization is critical because we're able to do what we've been able to accomplish by virtue of the fact that this organization continues to grow and continues to increase our influence, not only with the Public Service Commission, the legislature, but with the broad number of communities across the state. And the way we grow this organization is two fundamental ways. The first way is to grow the membership. We want more members to join this organization. We just had a new business member join today, Steve Sherman, who's a small business, and we're very happy to have him join us. And that's just a good example of how we're growing as an organization. But we also want to grow the organization by getting more members involved with the work that we are doing, because we only have 2 staff right now for GLREA, but we can get more work accomplished by getting more members involved with our various committees. We have an education committee, we have a utility committee, we have a finance committee, we have a membership committee. And so our goal this year is to get more and more members involved with this organization. And so that essentially is the second bucket of work that we want to accomplish this year. So just to recap, we have the programmatic work, where we do the legislation, the policy, the education work, and then we continue to build the organization. And throughout this entire process, whether it's program work or building the organization, we want to get more members involved. And then, like anything else, sometimes opportunities pop up throughout the course of the year. And if they do pop up, we're going to try and take advantage of them as they make sense in terms of the work, in terms of our mission, in terms of accomplishing our mission. So with that, I'm gonna stop and turn it back over to Mark Clevey for questions and answers.
Thank you very much, John. So again, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you have a bunch of boxes there. Mine on the fourth one in from the right is reactions. You can click on reactions and hit raise your hand. And as Stephen has done now, it'll show up and then we will call you out. So Stephen, you can unmute and please ask your question.
Hello, and thanks for the acknowledgement, John. Great to be a member of GLREA now. My question is related to the distributed generation cap. I don't know the whole history of it, but when I look at something like that, I can't think of a single honest reason they can justify that with any anti-competition, anti-free choice, etc. So I'm just curious if there's any comments from members that understand the history of how that initially got passed, and particularly at such a small cap. I believe it was 1% until the recent update.
Yeah, the origin of that was 2008 when Michigan first got net metering, and there was a 1% limit on net metering. And that was really from 2 ideas. One was they weren't really sure if you attached a whole lot of small generation to the grid, how it would function. Today, we know that concern was sort of ridiculous, right? There are other jurisdictions with massively more solar than Michigan's ever going to have, and they don't have a problem, right? So it was just sort of out of caution of the unknown. And then there was also the arguments from the utilities then with net metering, that net metering was a subsidy to solar customers, which I still disagree with, but that this would limit the maximum size of that subsidy. But now we're on DG and there's no subsidy at all. Well, there is. It's the other direction, right? The solar customers are subsidizing the rest of the ratepayers. So I don't know of any justification, but the utilities would just say, well, it's the law. And now the law has changed, but the legislators didn't say why 10% was the right number. They just said this is the new number. So yeah, I don't know.
But the only thing I want to add to that, and what John said is absolutely correct. But 10%, I mean, we barely hit 1% for DTE as of last August and September. So from 2008 to 2023, we barely hit the 1% cap for DTE. So the fact that we got it bumped up to 10% means that we're going to be comfortable for many, many years. And as more and more solar installations are added in Michigan, both small scale and large scale, the political constituency that supports the expansion of solar is only going to increase. The political will is going to increase in support and further support of expanding renewable energy. So I am very pleased that we got 10%. I would have preferred, of course, we got rid of it entirely. But again, sometimes the legislative process, you have to make compromises, and we never like to hear about that. But it's a reality, and sometimes you have to run with it. So, but I'm very pleased, and I'm sure all of our solar business members should be very happy, frankly.
Other questions? I guess I'll ask a question. John, Richter or John Freeman, one of the two of you. I was under the impression from when I was on the Energy Commission with the city of Ann Arbor, and DTE's plant was renewed, that they had been pre-approved for a new nuclear power plant by FERC, and this was 5 or 6 years ago at least. So I don't know how much that's going to speed up the process, but aren't they in the queue already?
Sort of.
Sort
There's a whole series of steps to getting a power plant approved, right? And yeah, that was the whole Fermi 3 proposal, right? So there was steps in there. But the whole idea now is nobody's going to build one of the existing power plant designs today, right? They've all had huge cost overruns. They're so expensive, it's ridiculous. The promise is that the new small modular reactors will be much less expensive. And the only one of those designs has even gone through the first stage of approval with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And that one that they were going to start building a plant, and then they pulled out of it. It had cost overruns and was too expensive before they even poured the concrete. So, that's why I say I don't see how it could happen between 2040, because they're going to do an SMR, and there aren't any licensed SMR designs yet.
Okay, great. That's good. Abraham, you're on. Remember to unmute. There you go.
Yes, unmuted. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can the Public Service Commission take the carbon footprint of building a new nuclear reactor into consideration, as opposed to the carbon footprint of wind and solar installations of similar capacity? Because there is a huge carbon footprint of that cement block.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Until this law passed, the answer was no.
Yeah.
But the answer now is certainly yes, because it talks about the impact on carbon emissions of the plant. If the plan is to pour a lot of concrete, then that has carbon emissions, right? Now, it did not say if it was talking about what do they call it? Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3, or something like that, right? Are you just considering the output of the plant, or the materials that went into the plant, or the whole suppliers that supplied right? There's different kind of carbon accounting rules that have not been that firmly established. Scope, thank you, Stephen. Scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions. And the law didn't specify whether it was talking about scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions. So I think the MPSC has, authority to interpret that as they want, since the law was completely non-specific on it.
But the other thing we have to keep in mind is that even under the old law, the Public Service Commission could seriously take into consideration the cost of nuclear power or the cost of renewable energy. And under the new law, cost is still front and center, but now it's also affordability of the rates for low and moderate income people. That's another factor that the Public Service Commission can take into consideration. So when you compare the cost of nuclear power versus the cost of solar or the cost of large-scale wind, there's no comparison. It's a hands down slam dunk for renewable energy. And so I just
And
don't
even
think,
DTE admits that.
yeah, I mean, I just don't think there's any
Yeah, thank-
conceivable way that nuclear power is going to go forward. And the other thing to keep in mind is that not only do we support renewable energy, we also support distributive energy. We want to try and get away from this centralized power, because as a result of having a monopoly in centralized power, it's also given the utilities tremendous amounts of political power. But by having alternative sources, distributive sources, where people can generate their own electricity, that kind of cuts the utilities down to size, and they become less of a barrier to innovation. So we want to move away from centralized power as much as we can. And if we have to have some centralized power, then let's have it through large-scale wind and solar. And that's clean energy. That's not generating carbon, and it's not generating high-level radioactive waste, which has to be stored for thousands of years. That's going to cost an arm and a leg. And the human species hasn't proven itself to be mature enough to be able to look after a dangerous substance for that long a period of time, in all frank candor.
So, John, speaking of maturity of the human species, I spent the day looking at the Supreme Court hearings. So I guess I feel compelled to ask, is any of what you've talked about tonight, of our plans, dependent on, the federal government? Could changes at the federal level impact any of this, the state legislation
Well,
principle, I guess?
I mean, in theory, sure. If Congress, if a Republican wins and, next January they try and get rid of the investment, the investment tax credit, get rid of the 30%, sure, that would have an impact. But we all know that the investment tax credit has been around for years. In fact, it increased under the Trump administration, because so much of renewable energy now is being developed in Republican states like Iowa, the Dakotas, and Nebraska, that many Republican senators and representatives support it because it's economic development. So I don't think it's ever going to be changed, that kind of a law at the federal level. What's the beautiful thing about solar and wind is that, frankly, it's the private sector market. The marketplace is driving this, because the cost of renewable energy has gone down so dramatically that now more and more businesses want it because they can save money on their energy expenditures. And that's what's driving the change. And every 10 months, DTE and consumers, they keep raising their rates. We're going to see on March 1st, or right around that time, DTE is going to file another rate increase. Every time they raise their rates, it just makes solar pencil out even more effectively. So it's like a negative catch-22. The utilities may not like residential solar. So how are they responding to it? They raise the rates, which makes it easier and more of a reason for people to get solar. So, I think they're silly myself. If I was in their shoes and I wanted to undercut residential solar, I'd lower the rates. But they're not smart. So we are. And that's why we're going to change the world.
So, Abraham, you have your hand up, so does Stephen. Did you guys forget to take your hands down, or do you have more questions?
No, I have a follow-up on that very same thing.
Okay.
And that is the cost of production per kilowatt known for nuclear produced kilowatt price, because it's known for solar and wind and coal. So I wonder where the nuclear falls.
Yeah. So numbers for that are actually in the IRPs filed by both DTE and Consumers Energy, as well as from what's the guy's name? Lux something. Is a company that reports those on a regular basis for nuclear.
Lazard. It's called
Thank you,
Lazard.
Lazard. Thank you. There's a lot of not a lot of new plants, right,
Yeah.
to base that on, but the newest ones are in Georgia. Vogel 1, 2, and now 3 are all online. And the cost overruns there were so enormous that Westinghouse Electric went bankrupt. So yeah, we have
Whoops.
fairly good numbers on those, and nuclear power is just very expensive. The argument the utilities make is you're comparing apples to oranges. Wind and solar produce power when they damn well want to, whereas nuclear power produces power 24/7, and it's therefore reliable baseload power. There's something to that, but they grossly exaggerate it.
And plus, the utilities aren't making the argument in Michigan. It's this Holtec company that is
Right.
a decommissioning firm that was hired to decommission Palisades. DTE and consumers aren't making that argument. They're
They
making
very
that
much
same
made that
argument.
when they're asking for gas plants, John. They
Yes,
didn't
they
ask
are
for
doing it for
nuclear,
natural
but
gas
same
plant.
argument with gas. We can turn it on and off when we want. That's great. Wind and solar, a little of that's nice, but we can't rely on it.
But the interesting development that John touched upon is that now we're getting 2,500 megawatts of storage. And what that means is we're going to be reducing the intermittency
Right.
of wind and solar. We're going to be putting that into battery storage that the power can come out at night, or it can come out on days when wind and solar isn't working. So the decrease in the cost of energy storage is a trend which is increasingly going to be a key factor in the development of these IRPs. And the first 2,500 megawatts, that's not an insignificant amount of storage. That's a pretty good sized chunk of storage. And so it's going to be really interesting because that demand for that storage is going to cause the cost of storage to go down as well. Same way that as soon as the 10% renewable portfolio standard was enacted in 2008, the demand for solar started to pump up, and then the cost came down because more people were wanting to buy solar in order to meet these standards.
Excellent point, Janice. Both of you.
I,
I want to get Janice in. We got 4 more minutes. Janice, you got a question?
I
Good.
think Stephen was before me. Stephen was up before me.
Stephen's already had one question, so you haven't had a question yet.
Oh, okay, thank you. Mine isn't really a question. I just wanted to clarify something that John Richter said. John, there are at least 8 different technologies for carbon sequestration. You mentioned one as if that was the only one, and that's not the case. Now, granted, 7 of these, of the 8, and I know I won't go into detail on it, but 7 of the 8 are no longer, not yet economic. But I know a little bit about it. I chaired a committee at the international level with ASHRAE where we did a white paper on the 8 different technologies, and also had chaired a session where I had 4 speakers that talked about the different technologies. So because carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can last from 2 to thousands of years, we're going to have to develop some technologies for carbon sequestration because it just stays in the atmosphere too long. Even if we stop today, there's still going to be CO2 in the atmosphere. So that's why it's important. It's just not economic right now. And I just don't want anyone to get the idea that there's just one technology and it helps oil and gas companies, which it does, by the way, but it's still not affordable right now. So I just
Yeah,
Great
no,
point.
it's a good
Great
point,
point.
Janice. And I just talked about the one because that's the one that DTE had talked about in a filing, right? Yeah, that there are other ways to go about it.
So let's get Stephen in here. We got 2 more minutes. Stephen, you're back in.
Thanks so much. Yeah, second question. Any kind of prioritization or paying attention to FERC Order 2222? Super catchy name. Translates to distributed energy systems are now able to participate in wholesale markets, including ancillary services. And if you ask me, it's a game changer. And John, I cannot agree more that yes, it's fossil to renewable. Everyone gets that now, even the utilities. What's more exciting about this energy transition is centralized to distributed. So any prioritization of FERC 2222 for this group this year?
Yes, so there's action going on with that with the MPSC. Uh, there are a number of states where third-party aggregators, right, have created virtual power plants where, like, all the little solar people will sign contracts with them, and they treat it like a power plant, and they've had some great success with that in other states.
Yeah.
In Michigan, the MPSC still does not allow that. But they have opened the door on aggregation of some larger systems and talked about that, and the utilities have kind of ignored that, and now the commission's prodding them a little bit about, hey, what about this? So there's some action in Michigan, but it's painfully slow, Stephen. And I think it's a huge opportunity, and we have had testimony on the opportunity of vehicle to grid. Right, and I did calculations and so what an enormous storage potential that's going to be, but so far not a lot of action here.
Well, with that, I want to thank everyone who came on tonight. We had quite a group to hear, and I definitely want to thank again John Richter, our Senior Policy Advisor, and John Freeman, our Executive Director, for the hard work you've been doing the last couple of years on all this, and having such a great plan to go forward. And we'll look forward to updates and get you back in the fall to hear how everything went. And of course, back again next year to kick off 2025. So with that, again, thank you for your questions. Thank you for your participation. If you haven't joined GLREA yet, please do. GLREA membership makes a great birthday present. So look forward to your continued support. John Freeman, you got a last word?